I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Well, thank you for joining me today, everybody. And last week was, in fact, Purple Heart Day. And so we wanted to talk to someone who had received some Purple Heart. We wanted to talk again about wounded veterans and also their recovery. So joining me today is Daniel Gade. He's a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, a two-time Purple Heart recipient. He lost one of his legs in Iraq, and he didn't let it hold him back. He went on to do incredible things. Not only does he run Ironman, is he a Paralympic world champion, but he's very involved in politics as well, and really helping veterans who are going through difficult times. And he works alongside America's Warrior Partnership and is trying to just get the VA to also perhaps change the way in which it incentivizes people to sort of claim benefits. And fascinating discussion with him. And I'm so pleased he can join us today. And as ever, I'm so pleased that you can join us as well and that you're listening. Thanks very much. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
I'm really glad to be on. Thank you so much.
I wondered if it's okay if we could start by talking, first of all, about your own injuries and what happened to you in Iraq.
Absolutely, of course. So I deployed to Iraq actually 20 years ago today is when I landed in Kuwait, and deployed forward into a place called Ramadi, which at the time was sort of the heart of the insurgency in Iraq. And I was wounded in action twice. Actually, there are a lot of people who have been wounded, and only a handful, I think, have been wounded twice, thankfully. But I was wounded November 10th, 2004 by a rocket-propelled grenade, which hit my tank in the middle of a firefight. It hit my tank and killed the soldier next to me, actually, a soldier named Dennis Miller from LaSalle, Michigan. And I just say that name because I think it's really important to remember the names of all these heroes so that they're alive still, in a sense, you know. And then 2 months later, I was hit again. In the first incident, I was very mildly wounded. I had some shrapnel up and down my arm and in my face, but it was all pretty minor. And then 2 months later, I was hit when I was in my Humvee. At the time I was a tank company commander, so I had about 100 or so guys working for me, and was going down this road, and my Humvee ran over a roadside bomb, an IED, and it ended up blowing up under my Humvee and sort of blew right through my right thigh. And I remember I woke up unconscious in the ditch, or I woke up in the ditch and I'd been unconscious for a little bit. And I remember thinking, like, and asking the soldiers who were with me, I said, "Are my legs okay?" And they said, "Sir, you're going to be fine." Which for, all of us who are combat veterans is like, that means that you're going to die probably. But they knew that my injuries were very serious, and they did everything they could on the battlefield. And then they put me on a helicopter immediately. And I was in surgery actually about 38 minutes after I got hurt. And that was fortuitous because my blood pressure when I went into surgery was 60/0. So I'd bled out almost completely. And what's a beautiful part of that story, actually, if there's any beauty that can come from war, which I'm skeptical of, but a beautiful part of that story was that they ran out of my type of blood, A positive, and they went to the mess hall and they said, "Attention, if you have A positive blood, we could use your help." And 25 sailors and Marines who I didn't know got up from their dinner and came over and donated blood fresh from their bodies into bags, and bags to the IV pole, and IV pole into my body. And I think that sort of that moment, I think, kind of illustrates what's best about America, that those other Americans were willing to lay down, their bodies for me. And it's like straight out of the Bible, right? No greater love hath any man than this. And that's what those soldiers were demonstrating, those Marines and sailors were demonstrating for me that day, just this poor broken soldier. So I spent about 5 months in the hospital as an inpatient and another 6 months as an outpatient, trying to, learn to walk and learn to see what my life was going to be like.
And you talk about something that's so important there, and that I talk about a fair amount on the podcast, and that is community. When you go through, anything as harsh as what you've gone through, I suppose injuries I've gone through as well, when you're surrounded by that kind of community, it really makes a huge difference. And I know that you work alongside America's Warrior Partnership, and their aim really is to come together as a community and help people who have gone through difficult times and who need help. And do you feel that community isn't strong enough at the moment? I mean, the fact that you have to set up America's Warrior Partnership suggests that perhaps there's not enough of it already. And I'm interested in what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, America's Warrior Partnership is in its 10th year. You can get more information by going to americaswarriorpartnership.org. An absolutely great organization. I'm proud to work with them and be on their advisory board. But the problem they're trying to solve is essentially one of connectivity. When you're in the military, you have this network of, my example is a perfect one, right? Of 25 people who will just give you their blood without even knowing your name. They'll give you their blood, right? And when you leave the military, all of that goes away, and the only people who care about you is your family. And so I think a lot of veterans really struggle with that connectivity to other people after service. And so getting all of the nonprofits, getting the government agencies, getting the for-profits, getting everybody together on the same page and recreating that network of connectivity, I think is so important. And that's kind of what America's Warrior Partnership does. They work at the community grassroots level to try to knit together other organizations, to try to enhance the services that companies are providing through their corporate veteran initiative and others. And all of that is designed to combat the loneliness and isolation, which can and does contribute to what we all know as a veteran suicide crisis in the United States and overseas.
And you say loneliness and isolation, and those are sort of. It reminds me there are two sides to this. In many cases you have the physical injuries. On the other hand, sense you have the mental difficulties. And I wonder how you can sort of compare the two of them.
I don't like to get in the comparison game. Although I do joke with other amputees like you, I would make a joke about it just being a flesh wound from the Monty Python movie. But I tend not to compare injuries just because I think that, a mental injury, frankly, even for somebody who never even went to combat, but they have maybe childhood trauma or maybe sexual assault or maybe, whatever it is, that mental injury can be far, far more debilitating than my, hip level amputation that, so I use crutches to get around or whatever, but so that's a mobility problem, but it's not a relationship problem. It's not a mental problem. And so, I really don't get into that too much, but I will say that, those mental injuries can be just as devastating as physical injuries, or even more so, because the mental injuries go directly to who you are as a person. And physical injuries only, to me, in my mind at least, only go to, what can you do as a person physically? And so it's slightly different, but I think that both physical and mental injuries and those people who have both, deserve care. And that's what America's Warrior Partnership and so many other great organizations are working to solve.
Yeah, it's interesting because when, and I've spoken to quite a few people who have, gone through difficult times, and you find some people like yourself who can be badly injured or gone through something difficult, but immediately pick themselves up. They aim to compete in Ironman competitions. They say, I want to do that. I won't be held back. And they have this incredible sense of resilience. And you get other people who find it very difficult to find that strength. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, in your case, where that strength came from, that you were never held down, you set yourself goals, and I've seen the list of things you got on to do, versus those people who weren't able to do that.
Right. Yeah. I think first off, my experience is just my experience, and your experience is just your experience. And those experiences are not, I think, generalizable to everybody else. But what I will say is that for me, my inspiration was sort of two-part. One is that my wife came to me very early on at the time we'd only been married for 5 years, and now we've been married 25 years. But she came to me and she said, hey, Daniel, look, and this is all paraphrasing, of course, but she said, look, while you're in the hospital, I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to take care of our kid, and I'm going to take care of our taxes, and I'm going to take care of all that stuff. But once you're able to, you are the leader of our family, and it's your responsibility to provide for us, not mine. And that was a huge thing, because I think for men especially, and actually I know this, there's all kinds of science and sociology and all this stuff, but for men especially, they get their identity from their work. And so for me, getting back to work and getting back to productivity as fast as possible was really, really important in building a base that I could do other things like Ironman triathlon or jiu-jitsu or CrossFit or all those other crazy things that I do. The idea was that my stable work environment and my life was building onto that. And I think way too often, guys just think that they can take their disability payments and go home, and that they will be able to build a life of meaning and purpose. And I think that for men especially, we know this, that meaning and purpose really come from our work and what we contribute to society. And so that's the problem that I think is a real problem for a lot of people.
But in a sense, you weren't able to go back to work. And I've spoken to a number of soldiers who, if their job is physical and they've been injured, they can't go back out to their team. They can't go back. And yes, there might be other jobs and things they can do inside the military, but the one thing they were doing is taken away from them overnight. And so where did you go to next? And I know that veterans, particularly with suicide, it is about being able to find another job you can go into. So where did you go straight afterwards? Because you couldn't go back into the front line.
No. So that's a great question. So I never went back to combat, but I did actually stay in the Army. So at the time I was a captain, and I was able to basically apply to the Army and say, look, I only have this one leg now, but there's still a bunch of Army jobs that I can do. And I ended up going to get a master's degree and a PhD. And then I went to teach at West Point. And so teaching at West Point at the United States Military Academy, teaching the next generation of officers was something that I could do with just one leg. And so there are quite a lot of military jobs that are capable of being done by people with even substantial disabilities. But even in regular society, most people don't have injuries like ours, right? Most injured soldiers don't have injuries like your injuries and like my injuries. Most are more minor than that, or more manageable. But what I would say is that there are so many nonprofits, and there are so many for-profits, and there are so many government agencies that are dying to find veterans to put into jobs. And so no matter what your disability level is, no matter what your physical or mental disability level is, there's probably work that you can do, except for maybe a few people with really, really substantial brain injuries. But other than that, we live in an information economy where you can work in your underpants from your living room. And so some of the burden here falls on the individual veteran. Like, you do actually have to take some action to get up off the couch and to go and put in an application and to go and ask for an internship and those kind of things. And that can be hard and scary, but it's not. It's on you to let people know that that's what you're trying to do, not on them to find you, I feel like. Yeah,
it's so interesting because so many people I've spoken to, they say that you get through difficult times because of the community and the team around you. But more recently, a few people have said, it's 80, 90% the team and people and family. But there has to be that 10 or 20% that is you, that says, today, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to move forward, or I'm going to learn to walk and I'm going to take 3 steps today when I took 2 steps yesterday.
That's right.
I'm still trying to figure out where I can understand where team comes from, and community comes from, and family comes from. But where does that 10%, that 20% of personal resilience, does that come from your childhood? Does that come from how you were raised? Does that come from your careers? But where does that come from?
Yeah, I call that grit. And I think that in the veteran community, it's actually really interesting. People like Jocko Willink and people like that have really taken off in terms of their influence in the veterans community, primarily, I think, because they're emphasizing, like, look, you've got to do this yourself. Jocko sort of famously posts a picture of his watch every morning on Instagram at like 4:30 or sometime like that, to show, hey, look, I'm getting up, I'm working out, even though I'm 50, even though I don't feel like it, even though whatever. And that level of grit, I think that 10%, all you need is that 10% of grit. And then the society is waiting to help you, but you just need to be the person who has the courage to take that step, and we talk about this. I think we talk about this with addicts and people like that too, where like, look, it's an act of courage to go to AA. It's an act of courage to go to inpatient rehab and to say, hey, I'm drinking too much. I need help to stop. And I'm going to take this brave step. And I think for veterans, especially veterans with serious disabilities, every morning when you get out of bed and, get into your wheelchair or grab your crutches, I think that's a daily act of courage to show that grit. It's a daily act of courage to love your to hug your wife, and it's a daily act of courage to hug your kids, even when they're not lovable. And I think that those kind of little daily acts of courage are things that we really ought to be celebrating, but demonstrating that grit, that 10% that you're talking about. I think that's brilliant. And I think you're exactly right that 10% has to come from somewhere. And I think most people have it. They just need to realize that they've got to put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the one thing that you learn when you've gone through something difficult, is that you might not know you've got it, but when your back is up against the wall and things are really difficult, it's inside everyone. Like if you look for it and you stand up and you can do it, anyone can do it. You really can do it.
That's right.
You're listening to Searching for Heroes with Benjamin Hall. We'll be right back. It's also, I think, fair to say that, you can have grit, you can get through anything, but no one does it without having difficult times and hard times. And, I'm sure all of us, have moments that just felt that you weren't sure you could carry on. And I suppose, what would your message be to the people who are feeling that downward point? And, we talk about veterans who are thinking that they're not going to get ahead. They've left, they're not in the military anymore, and so many suicides. What would your message be to them, to those people really who are struggling, who do think, I can't find that grit right now, I don't know how I'm going to do it anymore? What should they do? How should they be looking for a way out?
Yeah, all they've got to do, all they have to do is like the tiniest little thing, which is like raise your hand and say, I need help. And America's Warrior Partnership will help, and Wounded Warrior Project will help, and Team Red, White, and Blue will help. And I'm in Virginia, and the State Department of Veteran Services, which I used to lead for 2 years, will help. We can get somebody to you, but you just need to identify that you're somebody who needs help. You got to put your hand up, or reach out to anybody. I think that, again, I think there are people just dying to help, and it just takes this tiny little spark to light the fire, and the fire can be one that keeps you warm for a long time. But the spark has to be generated by the veteran or by the family member. Honestly, like sometimes, I think I don't know if you're married or anything, Benjamin, but like sometimes our wives are the ones who kind of light the spark and say, actually, you're not okay, and we are not okay, and our family's not okay. You need help. And for those wives, for those spouses, I shouldn't say wives, whatever, but for those spouses out there who are married to a veteran and the veteran is struggling, hey man, like help them have the courage to go get help, or call somebody and get them help yourself. So I think it's okay to call your buddy and say, hey man, are you okay? It's okay to say to your spouse, hey, you are not okay. You need help. Let's get you some help. So I would just encourage people to just be proactive. And then there is a safety net out there. You just need to let people know that you need to be in the net.
Yeah. You've written a book, it's called Wounding Warrior, and it is then bad policy making veterans sicker. And, we talk about community around us, but I suppose there has to be a level to which the government is also stepping in and helping. But I mean, you've been quite clear that the government itself isn't providing enough service, enough care for many veterans.
Yeah, well, so the book is Wounding Warriors. It's on Amazon. It's on Audible. I did the Audible book myself. You can go to woundingwarriors.com and order a signed copy. I'll send you one myself, actually. So, but the premise of the book isn't exactly what you said. The premise of the book is actually that the government is doing, the government does quite a lot. I mean, this year, the VA's budget is like $250 billion. It's a huge amount of money. And it's grown radically since 2000, before the war on terror. And there's been constant expansions of who's eligible and how much are they eligible for. And it's all these constant expansions, but yet the problem never gets solved. And the premise of the book is essentially that we're doing a lot of things, but we're doing the wrong things. And in particular, we pay disability benefits to people who frankly, those disability benefits can often cause them to exit the labor force and have worse outcomes. If you tell somebody they're disabled, if you tell somebody they can't work, then it can and does break the linkage between that person and work. And that person and their connection to work is what connects them to the broader community, as we talked about before. So if you wanted to design a bad system, you would design a system that has incentives that keep people at home, that has incentives that keep people out of the labor market, that has incentives to keep people as sick as possible. And the VA's disability system right now does all of those things. It tells you, hey, if you've got this level of disability, we'll pay you this much. But if you can go in and show that you're this disabled, then we'll pay you even more. And so people are trapped in this cycle of faking, and there's all the, I mean, it's really gross. And so people are focused on like, how disabled can I be, rather than thinking, how able can I be? How fast can I get back to my life? And so for me, it's fine to spend $250 billion if that's the number that we need to spend. But my point is, we could spend that money far better on employment programs and reskilling programs and upskilling programs and higher education and training people to be plumbers and electricians and tradesmen and all those things that we need as a society, coders, instead of convincing everybody that they're sick and disabled. And the stories in the book are told from the eyes of veterans who have experienced this system and had various kinds of reactions to it. But I think the disability system that we have is actually making people worse off, not better. It's putting a lot of money in people's pockets, and then those people are exiting the labor market, and they're having worse and worse outcomes. And eventually, in a lot of cases, that results in suicide, because we've created a culture of veterans feeling worthless. And it's really disgusting. And I think it takes people like, crassly, I think it takes people like me to be able to tell that story, because I have a very serious disability. Like I'm pro-veteran. I understand the struggle, trust me. But I think from a policy perspective, we can do way, way better with the money that we are spending to help people have better outcomes. And frankly, it's a national security issue. Nobody's going to want their kid to go in the military if they think that everybody in the military is going to come out disabled or broken or poisoned or raped or whatever. Nobody's going to want their kid to go in. And so this exaggeration of disability and this idea that everybody's disabled after military service and all that is threatening our national security. And I think it's disgusting, and I think it needs to get called out.
When you say that you understand the problem, trust me. I wonder if you could give an example to people listening in from your own experience that they could learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so in the book, for example, we tell the story. There's these two guys who entered service together, and they had very similar experiences in service. And then when they got out, one of them was like, hey, I need to go get a job. I need to go, I'm going to get married. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to go forward. And the other one was like, well, first I want to do all those things too, but first I need to go to the VA. And that person, the second guy, was sort of convinced by the VA that he needed to apply for more and more disability and all this stuff. And you can sort of see in the book the thread of his life kind of unraveling or decompensating, because he got trapped in a system which really is designed, our quote unquote healthcare system in the US is not really healthcare, it's sick care, right? It's taking care of people once they're actually sick, not taking care of their health up front. And the VA's system is one that's designed to kind of suck people in. And my own example of that was when I was exiting military service, when I was retiring from the Army in 2017, I went into my VA appointments and stuff. And I said, look, I'm only going to claim disabilities that were caused by combat. I'm not, don't tell me that I'm 42, I was 42 at the time. Don't tell me that I'm 42 and my body's not the same as it was when I was 20. I get that. But I'm only going to claim things that are disabilities that were caused by military service. And so I list out the scarring and the amputation and some nerve damage in my remaining leg and things like that. And the guy says, well, but what about your brain injury? And I said, oh, I don't have a brain injury. And he said, and he literally like knocked on the table, like, hey, pay attention. And he goes, what about your brain injury? I said, I don't have a brain injury. He said, listen, man, you're not paying attention to me. He goes, I can get you paid for that. And I said, I don't have a brain injury. I don't want the money, And he was just blown away by that. But this guy was trying to convince me to fake bad, to exaggerate my conditions in order to get more money. And you have to think that he's doing that same exact thing to 6, 10, 12, a dozen people, 15 people a day. And 14 of them are taking the money. And to me, that illustrates nicely the problem that we have, which is we're paying people to be sick, and then we're wondering, why do we have so many sick veterans?
Wow, and it's almost incentivizing them, bringing them down, trying to give them
100%.
those.
Yes, Benjamin, absolutely incentivizing them. The whole system is set up to incentivize them in that way. I'd actually love it. I'll send you a copy of the book, and then maybe we can have another conversation about it on the podcast, because I think you'll find it totally fascinating. And the foreword to the book is written by James Mattis, former Secretary of Defense, and there's a couple of secretaries of the VA who are cited in the book who say, yeah, this is the true story. And but it's certainly an interesting book. The book, again, is Wounding Warriors. It's on Amazon.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if we could finish up then, coming back to the beginning and talking about Purple Hearts. And, today is a Purple Heart Day. And I think, however you get through your injuries, no matter how bad they are, how you can recover, we've got to go back to remembering those people who have been injured while serving their country. And, what would you say when we talk about Purple Heart recipients on Purple Heart Day? What are your thoughts? Yeah,
so I have two Purple Hearts. I was wounded in combat twice, and the Purple Heart is America's oldest military decoration. It was originally sort of the Revolutionary War version of the Medal of Honor, and then later was kind of became the medal for those who'd been wounded by enemy action. And for me, it illustrates the idea of shedding blood for your country. Sort of generally speaking, people with Purple Hearts have bled for their country. And I call it a fellowship of suffering. When I'm driving down the road and I see, another car with Purple Heart plates or something, sometimes I'll give them a little honk or a little wave, just because I know that whether it was Afghanistan or Iraq or Vietnam or World War II or whatever, that those people have seen blood come out of their body that as a result of their willingness to serve our country. And so to me, the Purple Heart is a symbol of sacrifice and a symbol of suffering. And for so many people, a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice. If you go to Section 60 at Arlington, which if you've not been, I recommend you go. And that's the place where most of the killed in action from the War on Terror are kind of in Section 60 at Arlington. I would just point out to people that is a beautiful, beautiful place. And so many of those gravestones say Purple Heart on them. And those people gave all for our country and for the idea of the United States. And I just think that's remarkable. And so, I'm proud of my Purple Hearts. I wish I didn't have them. I wish I had both legs and no Purple Hearts. But since I do, I take it as an obligation to tell my story and an obligation to try to help other people as much as I can. Yeah. Well, look, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for your service, your Purple Hearts. And I know that people will never forget those people who have received them. And thank you for everything you continue to do for veterans and for veterans, who are going through difficult times. So again, if anyone is listening, please look up America's Warrior Partnership. There's so many veterans out there who could do with help, who just need direction. And I know you guys are doing that. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Benjamin. All right. Take care. Well, that was really fascinating. That was the first time that I've ever sort of heard about how the VA can step in and really sort of just tries to incentivize people to take benefits. And I understand the big problem there, that if you are told that you can collect more money because you are more injured, it creates this culture in which many people might just pick that, in which case they lose the drive to improve themselves. And $250 billion is a lot of money for the VA to give away, and I'm sure most of it is given away for all the right reasons. But I do think it's something that needs to be looked at closely. And I do think that rather than relying on handouts and people who can just say, you don't have to work, you can just be given payouts, it's about training people. And as Daniel said, teaching veterans to become plumbers, teaching them to become builders, teaching them to go out and create new jobs for themselves when they need to do it. So again, recovery is part of so many different things. It's about family, community, togetherness, but it's about also working together. And it's about finding your own way through it. And it's about finding that grit that he talked about. So look, thanks very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it and look forward to speaking to you next week. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. And Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free
on the Amazon Music app.